My brothers, my sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today we speak not just of Burkina Faso, but of Africa's awakening. If you believe in freedom, unity, and the power of our people, then make sure you subscribe. Share this story, and let the world hear Africa's voice. Because what you are about to witness is not just history, but is destiny. The morning began with applause, deliberate, rehearsed, and hollow. Cameras flashed like lightning, scattering reflections across the walls of glass and steel. Beneath the hum of microphones and translation headsets, one man stood still. Ibrahim Traoré did not move, did not smile, did not flinch. His posture was calm, but behind his stillness lay the weight of an entire continent's expectation. Across the hall, another man took the microphone, a symbol of power and wealth, whose every gesture was designed to fill a room. He spoke loudly, half joking, half provoking, and the words landed like a dare. Let's see if Africa can build what America builds. A year, maybe two. I doubt even that, the crowd laughed. The moment was caught from 7 angles, replayed, clipped, subtitled, exported to every platform. In those frames, some saw mockery. Others saw a spark. The cameras caught Traoré's face, unreadable, quiet. What looked like a pause of defeat was something else entirely. A silence, gathering strength. Within hours, the challenge had left the hall and entered the bloodstream of the internet. Pundits turned it into theater, analysts into metrics. Can Burkina Faso do it? Is the president out of his depth? The challenge was framed as a contest, but for Traoré it was something different. He did not answer with words. He left the summit, boarded a plane, and flew home. From above, Burkina Faso looked endless. Earth tones fading into rivers of dust, villages stitched together by roads that shimmered in heat. As the jet descended, Ouagadougou came into view. Rooftops, markets, and the pulse of people moving through a city that carried both hardship and stubborn joy. Children waved at the convoy as it passed. They had seen the news. They smiled anyway. The drive from the airport was long and quiet. Advisors filled the car with numbers and concerns. He listened, eyes fixed on the horizon. To the rest of the world, a year was a measure of time. To him, it was a measure of doubt, how long outsiders assumed Africa needed before it could stand without help. That night, long after the city had dimmed, he entered his office alone. The desk was covered in reports, economic warnings, engineering estimates, foreign letters heavy with caution. Every page began the same way. It cannot be done. He read them all slowly until only one remained. In its margin he wrote, "Then we will learn how." The days that followed were not grand but grounded. He traveled without cameras, visiting villages where machines had rusted and hope had gone quiet. He spoke to farmers and builders, to women running cooperatives from borrowed sheds. He asked not for slogans but for truth. What did they need? What did they believe was possible? Every story he heard built the blueprint in his mind. A nation could not leap forward through wealth it didn't yet have. It had to rise through effort it already carried. He began drafting an idea that was neither factory nor symbol, but both. A home for production powered by local knowledge and shared purpose, built with what they had, starting now. When he announced it, even his own ministers hesitated. They called it unrealistic, premature political theater. He replied only that waiting another decade was the greater illusion. Within a week, surveyors marked a plot of land at the city's edge. Silent, wind-swept ground where weeds hid old foundations. He stood there at dawn as lines were drawn into the dust. By sunset, workers had arrived. They brought shovels, rebar, food, laughter. There was no grand funding. Only motion, soon word spread. Journalists visited to photograph bare soil and empty scaffolds. Their captions dripped with disbelief, a dream, not a plan. But each night, more hands joined the work. Some brought tools, others just faith. What began as a project of pride turned into a shared act of defiance. Traoré returned to the site after dark, walking between rising frames of steel that caught the moonlight, like the ribs of a sleeping beast. He imagined them finished, humming with life, giving work to thousands. Around him, the city breathed its rough, rhythmic song. The bark of dogs, the clatter of bicycles, the murmur of distant drums. He thought of Sankara's voice echoing across time, that true independence was built, not granted. By the end of the first month, the outline of something vast stood against the dawn. It wasn't complete or even half, but it was real, undeniable proof of motion. Dust rose with every step, coating skin and metal in gold. Journalists returned, their tone uncertain now. There is no chaos here, one wrote, only rhythm. Every obstacle tightened the resolve. Materials ran short, deadlines mocked them, yet progress continued, inch by inch. Where the world saw a race against a clock, Traoré saw a lesson in unity, a demonstration that belief could build faster than money. He spent long evenings walking the perimeter alone, the hum of generators echoing faintly from the distance. Each sound meant one more machine working, one more promise kept. He looked toward the horizon, where the stars met the rising dust, and whispered to no one. They said a year. The night air carried heat and hope in equal measure. Somewhere beyond the site, reporters were already preparing stories about inevitable failure. Somewhere within, welders worked by flashlight, their sparks tracing brief constellations across the dark. He turned once more toward the frame of the structure, now visible even in shadow, a silhouette of ambition. The challenge had been issued. The countdown had begun, and though the world measured him by time, he was measuring something else entirely. The distance between disbelief and proof. They had given him a year. He had 90 days, and the first day was already gone. The world had dismissed him as a man of words. The cameras had captured his youthful face, the red beret, the defiance in his eyes. But behind those images was a country choking on despair. Burkina Faso stood on the edge of collapse. The soil cracked beneath bare feet. The rivers that once sang through the valleys had dried into hollow scars. The people no longer prayed for prosperity. They prayed to survive another sunrise. When Traoré returned to his office at the heart of Ouagadougou, his advisors brought him numbers that bled. A 12% drop in food output. Rising infant mortality, blackouts sweeping the capital. The treasury was nearly empty. The world powers had turned their backs, and their media mocked him. The soldier with dreams but no economy. They said he could lead chants, not countries. They said he could fight rebels, but not feed children. But inside him, something ancient stirred. A restlessness that came from knowing the chains his people wore were not made of iron, but of humiliation. He had grown up watching mothers bargain for rice grains in markets, men fight for drops of water, children grow hollow-eyed under the unforgiving sun. He had seen foreign corporations extract gold from his homeland and send it across oceans, leaving behind dust and hunger. He could not accept that this was destiny, and yet the mountain before him was immense. To rebuild a nation in ruin required more than hope. It required a miracle. That night, alone in the dim glow of his office lamp, he opened a worn notebook. On its pages were his father's old writings, a collection of sayings and plans from men who believed Africa could build its own world. One line stood out, written in fading blue ink. They will say it's impossible, because they have not yet seen it done. He circled the words. Then, as thunder rolled outside, he made a decision that would redefine the limits of what one man could do. The next morning, he summoned his council. No greetings, no pleasantries. 3 months, he said. That's all we have. We will transform the land itself. The men and women in the room froze. 3 months for what, sir? One finally asked. To build what they said Africa could never build. There were no further explanations. No blueprint, no public announcement. Only a coded phrase that spread quietly through the ministries. Operation Dawn. Behind closed doors, soldiers became engineers, engineers became visionaries, and farmers became partners in a secret that defied reason. Trucks rolled in under moonlight, carrying unmarked crates. Planes landed on silent runways in the outskirts of the desert, their engines whispering of deals made in the shadows. Whispers spread like wildfire. Was it weapons? Was it gold? Was Traoré bargaining with powers unseen? The people didn't know, but for the first time, they saw movement, real, restless motion. And motion meant hope. Days bled into nights. Generators hummed where there had been silence. Old factories reopened, not with foreign investors, but with the same workers who once stood at their gates, begging for wages. The air filled with the clang of hammers, the scent of hot steel, and the rumble of bulldozers tearing through the carcass of a forgotten city. Foreign media called it madness. A delusional race against time, one network claimed. Burkina Faso's young leader risks everything on a phantom project, another wrote. And when journalists demanded answers, all Traoré said was, "Judge me by the dawn, not by the darkness." He worked in silence. He slept in brief intervals, often in the same dusty tents as his men. The desert wind would whip against his uniform, the same red dust coating his boots as theirs. He watched men collapse from exhaustion and rise again. He watched mothers bring food to laborers at midnight. He watched children gather at the fences, eyes wide, whispering, "He's building something for us." Still, doubts lingered. Some of his closest allies began to crack under the pressure. One night, his economic minister confronted him. "President, we have no more reserves. The dollar is falling against us. The world is laughing. What are we building? What is this Operation Dawn?" Traoré's gaze was unshaken. "A future," he said. "One they can't take from us." But even as he spoke, the vultures circled. Western diplomats arrived with smiles and veiled threats. They offered loans. They offered aid. They offered partnerships, each one laced with chains. When Traoré refused, they tightened their grip. IMF sanctions followed. Foreign contractors pulled out. Power grids were cut under mysterious technical issues. Rumors of sabotage spread. The pressure was suffocating. Food prices doubled. Rebels in the north began to stir, funded by unseen hands. On social media, disinformation swarmed. Accusations that Traoré was hiding billions, that his secret project was a vanity scheme. But he didn't break. He smiled. Because in the chaos, no one could see what was really happening. At the edge of the Sahel, under the relentless sun, something vast was taking shape, an impossible structure rising from the earth. Workers called it the skeleton of hope. It shimmered faintly in the distance, as if reality itself struggled to define it. One night, as Traoré stood overlooking the horizon, a senior officer approached him. "They said Trump mocked you," the officer said quietly. "He said Africa can't build what America builds in a year." Traoré's eyes never left the skyline. "Then let him watch what Africa builds in 3 months." The wind howled through the valley like an omen. The structure continued to rise piece by piece, secret by secret. The world would soon know what Operation Dawn truly meant. But for now, all they could see was dust and the fire of a man who refused to kneel. The sun rose like a blade over the horizon, sharp, white, merciless. Burkina Faso had become a theater of whispers. In every cafe, every marketplace, every checkpoint, people spoke in hushed tones about Operation Dawn. No one truly knew what it was, yet every soul felt its pull, like a storm gathering unseen. But storms invite enemies. 3 weeks into the project, sabotage began. It started small, missing supplies, broken machinery, communication blackouts. Then came the explosions. One night, a convoy carrying steel frames was ambushed on the outskirts of Kaya. Dozens of workers vanished. The air smelled of diesel and death. By morning, the government's radio was filled with static. Traoré didn't flinch. He stood before his council, his eyes burning with exhaustion and purpose. "They're afraid," he said. "That means we're close." His men looked broken, gaunt from sleepless nights, trembling from the weight of failure. They'd been working without proper fuel, with no external support, while the world mocked their ambition. The IMF had frozen Burkina Faso's remaining reserves, declaring the nation financially unstable. Even neighboring leaders, once allies, began to distance themselves. They called him reckless, a dreamer. And yet in the desert, something was growing, a colossal skeleton of metal and glass that shimmered even under moonlight. It was unlike anything Africa had ever seen. Engineers who came to visit stood speechless before its form. Its foundations seemed to hum with hidden energy, as though it carried more than weight. It carried intent. Every night, Traoré would walk its length alone, boots echoing on unfinished metal, his breath misting in the cold air. He would run his hand along the glass panels, whispering under his breath, "They will believe when it's done." But the shadows deepened. Rebel forces, funded by unknown backers, began moving south. They weren't after territory, they were after the construction site. Drones captured strange movements at night, unmarked vehicles, laser dots flickering over the valley, voices in languages no Burkinabe soldier spoke. One morning, a letter arrived in a plain envelope. No insignia, no sale. Inside a single typed sentence, "You are building what we swore you never would. Stop, or we will stop you." He burned it. That evening, he met with his closest allies, the few who still believed without question. The Minister of Energy, the Commander of Logistics, and an old farmer from his childhood village who had become the project's spiritual heart. "Do you understand what's at stake?" he asked them. "This isn't just steel. It's the promise that we can rise without permission." The farmer nodded slowly. "Then we must build even if the sky falls." And so they did. Days blurred into one another, sun, sand, sweat, and fire. The workers' hands cracked from the heat. Water was scarce, food was rationed, yet no one left. They had seen Traoré labor beside them, carrying beams, sleeping in tents, sharing their meager meals. His defiance was contagious. Meanwhile, the world watched with a mixture of fascination and contempt. Western news anchors smirked at the footage. "President Traoré continues his mysterious project despite economic ruin," one said. Analysts predict complete collapse within weeks. But behind the satire, intelligence agencies began to panic. Satellite images revealed that the structure spanned miles, an immense corridor of reinforced glass and solar steel, cutting through the desert like a mirror to the sky. "What is he doing?" asked one American general during a closed meeting. "What's the endgame?" No one had answers, only suspicions. Then came the breaking point. In the dead of night, a sabotage unit infiltrated the site. They moved like ghosts, foreign-trained, ruthless. They planted charges at the central column, the heart of the structure. But one of them hesitated when he saw what lay beneath. A long pipeline, carrying not oil, but light. Fiber optic veins glowed faintly beneath the glass, transmitting solar energy from distant fields. This wasn't a monument, it was a power network, a living artery designed to bring free energy to villages across West Africa. The saboteur froze, realizing too late what it meant. Then the alarms blared. Soldiers rushed in. Gunfire echoed against the desert walls. Flames rose. The air turned to smoke and chaos. Traoré arrived moments later. He stepped into the burning site, coughing through the dust, dragging fallen men to safety. His uniform was scorched, his face streaked with ash, but his voice cut through the screams like thunder. "Do not stop. Not tonight. Not ever." The workers, seeing him among them, rose again. With bleeding hands, they extinguished fires and rebuilt through the smoke. Sparks lit the night sky like stars being born. By dawn, the saboteurs were gone, vanished into the dunes. The damage was immense, but the structure still stood. Bent, scorched, fractured, but unbroken. The world saw the footage. Ibrahim Traoré standing before a shattered monument of glass and fire, refusing to retreat. Reporters replayed the image endlessly. To some, he was a fool. To others, a prophet. He said nothing to the cameras. He turned, raised a soot-stained fist, and whispered only to his people. They tried to burn the sun, but the sun does not burn, it shines. Then he returned to work. The following weeks were a race against collapse. Supplies ran dry. Generators failed. Yet every night more people arrived. Volunteers, villagers, even ex-soldiers from neighboring nations who had heard the rumors and crossed borders to help. They came barefoot, hungry, determined. The site became a symbol, not of one man's vision, but of defiance itself. Meanwhile, in the West, panic set in. Economic analysts warned that if Traoré succeeded, he would upend decades of control. Africa, powered by its own energy, meant independence from their systems. Sanctions tightened. Foreign media shifted tone, from ridicule to fear. And then quietly, something extraordinary happened. In a broadcast aired on a Sunday morning, A clip emerged from 2019, Donald Trump, standing at a business summit laughing as he said, "Trust me, they can't do in a year what we can do in 6 months." Africa's not ready for that kind of innovation. The clip went viral again, but this time as a challenge. People began to repeat it. They can't do it in a year. And then, defiantly, watch us do it in 3 months. Across Burkina Faso, walls were painted with the phrase. Schools, buses, even army trucks carried it in bold red letters. It became a battle cry. Traoré, upon hearing it, smiled faintly. He understood what was coming. The final weeks would define everything, not only his leadership, but the belief of an entire continent. He looked out over the horizon, where the glass structure curved toward the heavens, gleaming like a second sunrise. "We finish in 3 months," he said quietly, "or we never rise at all." And as the wind swept across the dunes, the desert seemed to whisper back, as if even the earth itself was waiting for the dawn. The 90 days had almost passed. The desert sun scorched the earth with relentless fury, and the wind carried fine dust like whispers of doubt through the skeletal frames of steel and glass. From miles away, the structure gleamed under the morning light, a ribbon of ambition stretching toward the sky. What had begun as a simple plan to build, to prove, to inspire, had grown into a living testament to determination. The world was watching. Not just journalists, but investors, analysts, foreign governments, and everyday citizens who had once mocked him. They came for spectacle, expecting failure, expecting dust and ruin. Instead, they arrived to a scene that defied expectation. Cranes rose and fell with precision. Machinery hummed in synchronized rhythm, and a workforce of thousands moved with quiet purpose under the desert sun. Traoré walked the site alone at first, boots crunching against sand and gravel. He paused at every major beam, every corner of the structure, every panel of polished glass reflecting the bright sky. The enormity of what they had built struck him, not in pride, but in awe. Each element carried the weight of his people's labor, the sweat of women and men who had given everything without promise of reward, and the courage of a nation unwilling to bow to the world's doubt. As he walked, he observed engineers calibrating machinery with precision he had never seen in the early days of the project. Trucks carried raw materials with flawless timing. Workers, though exhausted, moved with a rhythm that suggested more than training. It was instinct, a collective heartbeat fueled by belief. Then came the final inspection. Not from him, not from ministers, but from the global audience. Satellite feeds, drones, live news broadcasts, all eyes were on Burkina Faso. Reporters leaned forward, cameras zooming in on steel columns, glass panels, and workers' hands. Analysts calculated everything down to the second. Governments prepared press statements, some in condemnation, some in disbelief. The world had placed its bet, expecting chaos. And still the structure stood. The last panels of glass were raised, sunlight slicing through the gaps, reflecting on the polished metal frames. Generators roared to life for the first time in unison, sending energy coursing through the network. Lights flickered on across the site. Laboratories, workshops, and assembly halls all illuminated simultaneously. The sound was not merely mechanical. It was orchestral. Every hum, every rotation, every spark blended into a symphony of creation. Traoré stood on a high platform, looking down at the workforce below. Thousands of eyes met his. They did not look at a leader. They looked at a man who had carried their collective dream across impossible terrain, who had refused to surrender to doubt, scarcity, or ridicule. He raised his hand, not in command, but in acknowledgement. And the site responded, in perfect harmony, as though the entire desert itself had taken a breath and exhaled life. Foreign envoys and journalists could only gape. No one had expected it. Not even the most optimistic supporters had imagined a completion like this, a functioning hub capable of producing energy, materials, and knowledge across the region. Every challenge that had been thrown at the project, sanctions, supply shortages, skepticism, had been absorbed and transformed into momentum. Traoré's aides approached with final reports. Every system tested beyond expectations. Output exceeded the original design. Efficiency was not only achieved, it was multiplied. The nation's economy, once shackled, had already begun to pulse with renewed vitality. Villages reported electricity for the first time. Schools and hospitals running independently. Communication networks restored. A satellite feed captured the first official test. Solar arrays feeding into newly installed grids. Water purification systems humming into life. Workshops producing their first outputs. The feed transmitted live across the continent and the world. Analysts reeled. Headlines changed mid-broadcast. Burkina Faso completes impossible project. African vision surpasses global expectations. President Traoré defies all odds. Yet amidst the grandeur, Traoré remained silent. He did not celebrate. His satisfaction was quiet, internal, almost sacred. He walked the corridors, checking machinery, speaking briefly with engineers, observing the youngest workers in awe of what they had helped create. This was not his victory alone, it was theirs. Then came the final demonstration. A convoy of vehicles, all powered by the energy generated on site, departed in formation. Drones followed, capturing every movement. Generators provided electricity to nearby villages previously untouched. Schools illuminated, hospitals powered, workshops producing tools, fabrics and machinery components. The project had transcended construction. It had become a lifeline. Observers from across the globe recorded every moment. Analysts muttered calculations in disbelief. International investors who had once mocked him were scrambling to understand how such efficiency was achieved without foreign capital or oversight. The IMF released a statement acknowledging the success, though carefully worded, as if to admit a lesson learned too late. Traoré stood again at the platform. Sunset behind him, casting long shadows across the site. The wind swept the desert dust into swirling patterns around the glass and steel. He watched the workers disperse, their laughter echoing faintly across the expanse, carrying with it the sense of renewal. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax, though he knew the work would continue. What had begun as a challenge, a moment of doubt cast by one powerful voice, had become a testament to perseverance, planning, and collective will. In less than 3 months, Burkina Faso had not only proven that it could achieve what the world deemed impossible, but it had also created a tangible legacy, one that would inspire generations. He gazed at the structure, now alive with energy and motion, and finally spoke aloud, though only to those near him. We were told it could not be done. We were told to wait, but we did not wait. We built. And now, it is not just a project, it is a promise. Around him, the desert grew quiet, as if the earth itself had paused to acknowledge the achievement. The sun dipped lower, casting the glinting glass in brilliant gold, and for a fleeting moment, the entire horizon seemed to shimmer with possibility. The world could no longer doubt. What had been impossible had been done, and though the project would continue to grow, to expand, to evolve, the moment had already passed into history. The moment when determination, vision, and unyielding courage reshaped not just a city, not just a nation, but the perception of an entire continent. The cameras recorded the scene endlessly. Reporters struggled for words. Analysts recalculated. The headlines rolled in, new and urgent. Africa's potential realized. Leadership redefined. A nation builds its future. And in the heart of it all, standing quietly amid the energy, the dust, and the hum of life, Ibrahim Traoré remained steadfast, the calm at the center of a storm of achievement, the silent conductor of a symphony built from hope, labor, and unshakable belief. The epic moment was complete, but the story was far from over. What had been built in 3 months would continue to grow, inspiring not only his nation, but countless others. It would remain a symbol of what is possible when doubt is met with determination and vision is met with action. The sun rose again over Burkina Faso, this time not as a challenge, but as a promise. The desert, once silent and harsh, now thrummed with energy, light, and motion. Villages that had struggled for decades now flickered with electricity. Schools and hospitals were alive with activity. The structure at the edge of Ouagadougou had become more than steel and glass. It had become the pulse of a nation. The first morning after the completion of the project, Traoré walked among the people. Children ran beside him, laughing as they followed the hum of newly powered machines. Mothers carried baskets of fruit, their faces bright with relief and pride. Artisans displayed tools and products for the first time in months, no longer dependent on distant suppliers. Energy coursed freely where scarcity had once been absolute. Journalists documented every step, but even their cameras could not capture the scale of transformation. Every smile, every spark of life in the towns and villages touched by the project spoke louder than any headline. Traoré paused at a small school where children crowded around a solar-powered light. Their wide eyes reflected wonder. One little boy held out a simple pencil and paper, eager to draw the building that had changed everything. Traoré bent down and whispered, "Draw the future you want to see. It belongs to you now." Over the next weeks, the story spread across the continent. Leaders and citizens alike traveled to Ouagadougou, eager to witness what had been done. They came skeptical, cautious, expecting some showpiece destined to fail. They left inspired, their doubts replaced with awe. Burkina Faso had not simply completed a project in 3 months. It had proved a principle: ingenuity, courage, and collective will can overcome any obstacle. Regional leaders took notes. Students and innovators exchanged ideas, and ordinary people began to speak differently about their own potential. If Burkina Faso could do it, why couldn't we? The question echoed through classrooms, marketplaces, and parliament halls across West Africa. Traoré remained at the center of it all, calm and purposeful. He never sought the spotlight, never demanded accolades. His pride was quiet, rooted in the knowledge that what mattered most was not his name, but the transformation he had helped set in motion. Yet even as he walked the site, inspecting final calibrations, foreign dignitaries could not ignore his presence. Analysts and critics were forced to acknowledge the undeniable. Leadership, vision, and steadfastness had yielded tangible results in record time. Global media finally shifted its tone. Headlines once mocking now read, "Burkina Faso redefines possibility. Ibrahim Traoré proves African innovation. A continent witnesses transformation." International conferences invited him to speak, not to debate, but to demonstrate how leadership anchored in courage and collaboration could succeed where theory had failed. Traoré's vision extended beyond the project itself. The facility became a hub for education, training, and technology transfer. Engineers from across Africa came to learn, to adapt, and to implement similar systems in their home countries. Scholars analyzed every detail, not only of the structure, but of the organizational principles behind it. Decentralized collaboration, reliance on local expertise, rapid prototyping, and community engagement. The impact on the local economy was immediate. Jobs were created, markets flourished, and small enterprises thrived under the protection of the new infrastructure. Energy independence allowed communities to power workshops, water systems, and schools without external aid. Farmers could preserve crops, artisans could produce more, and families no longer went hungry as they had for generations. Traoré himself remained focused on the long-term vision. He convened councils with educators, engineers, and community leaders, ensuring that the knowledge and expertise generated by the project would continue to propagate. He did not seek personal glory, but he did understand that his role as a symbol could inspire a broader movement of self-reliance, innovation, and continental pride. Outside Burkina Faso, reactions were profound. Analysts in Europe and North America began reassessing their assumptions about African development. Governments studied the project's methodology, realizing that leadership, local engagement, and audacious planning could achieve what large-scale foreign intervention often failed to do. Young Africans began sharing the story on social media, inspiring innovation hubs in other nations. The narrative of dependence slowly gave way to a narrative of empowerment. Within Burkina Faso, celebrations were held quietly, yet everywhere. Communities organized events in the shadow of the structure, children played beneath its beams, and workers, many of whom had not seen their families in weeks, were welcomed home as heroes. Schools began teaching lessons derived from the project itself, turning real-life achievement into curriculum. Lessons in physics, engineering, logistics, and leadership intertwined with history and civic pride. Traoré did not attend every celebration. He preferred to walk the streets anonymously, observing the small changes that often go unnoticed by headlines. A child running to school on a new road, a farmer installing solar-powered irrigation, a young engineer sketching her first design. These moments mattered more than applause. They were proof that the project had become self-sustaining, that its purpose had exceeded the limits of its physical form. Months passed. The structure remained a beacon, not merely of achievement, but of possibility. Foreign investors and international organizations approached with cautious curiosity. Unlike before, they were now invited to learn, to adapt, and to respect local leadership rather than dictate terms. Burkina Faso had shifted from being a recipient of guidance to a source of inspiration. Traoré continued to work. Even as the initial project stabilized, he planned expansions, integrating renewable energy, training more engineers, and connecting rural communities to the central hub. His vision was continental in scope, a network of facilities that could enable West Africa to harness its own potential and thrive independently of external pressures. Yet the most profound impact was intangible. Confidence had returned to the people. Hope had been restored. Where despair had once weighed heavily on villages and towns, now there was movement, light, and expectation. Children dreamed not only of survival, but of innovation. Young adults considered leadership, entrepreneurship, and science as viable paths. The social fabric, once frayed by scarcity and doubt, was strengthened by shared accomplishment. In a quiet moment, Traoré stood atop the highest platform of the structure at sunset. The golden light caught the steel and glass, reflecting a spectrum that seemed almost impossible, yet entirely real. He gazed over the city and beyond, the rivers, the fields, the roads winding through villages. The nation had witnessed transformation. He had kept a promise to the people. And yet, as he looked further, he understood this was only the beginning. He lowered his gaze to the workers, still performing minor tasks, cleaning, organizing, and preparing for the next day. Their faces were tired but radiant. He smiled faintly, knowing that the greatest achievement was not the building itself, but the awakening it had sparked. The knowledge that when a people dare to act together, the impossible becomes reality. The world had expected failure, delay, or compromise. Burkina Faso had delivered none of these. 3 months of relentless determination, vision, and courage had redefined what leadership could accomplish. Nations beyond Africa took note, but none could replicate the spirit that had built this project, a spirit that was uniquely African. And uniquely Burkinabe Traoré turned to the horizon, letting the wind carry the quiet echo of victory. The cameras recorded, but they could not capture the essence of what had been achieved. Not simply a structure of glass and steel, but a structure of hope, resilience, and enduring inspiration. And as the sun dipped below the desert skyline, the people of Burkina Faso looked up at the gleaming monument and whispered the question that would define a generation. Is this the moment Africa claimed its future? The answer was no longer uncertain. The story of Ibrahim Traoré and the 3-month transformation became legend. Not because of speed alone, but because it proved what humanity has always suspected but too rarely sees. That vision, courage, and collective will can bend the arc of history. One leader, one people, and one dream had become a reality, and the world could only watch, amazed, as the desert sang with light, life, and promise.